Today, we visit the nation's capital, the beautiful city of Ottawa, virtually, of course, to have a much anticipated chat with reputable criminal lawyer Bruce Engel of Engel and Associates. Hi, and a hearty welcome to everyone tuning in to today's podcast. We appreciate you taking the time to do so. And for the next 30 to 45 minutes or so, our wonderful guest, Bruce, discusses his important work and offers his critical take on matters relating to men and boys. Hi, my name is Dipchand Ramcharitar, and I'm the Outreach and Development Coordinator here at Voice of Men 360. Voice of Men 360 is a non-profit organization based in London, Ontario, Canada, primarily focused on the interests of men and boys, although we reach out to other demographics as best we can. We are part of International Men's Day. International Men's Day has been around for more than 20 years and serves in over 90 countries, also advocating for men and boys, especially on important issues. This is Open Up, a weekly podcast produced and hosted by Voice of Men 360, where we engage with innovative thinkers and influential leaders to address key issues to positively impact society with an emphasis on supporting men and boys. Before introducing our special guest, Bruce Engel, here's our disclaimer. We would like to remind you that Voice of Men 360's mission is always delivered with good faith towards peaceful harmony. The views and opinions expressed in today's episode are those of our speakers and do not necessarily represent Voice of Men 360. Our organization engages in discussion forums to offer inspiration and create awareness of the issues of men who wish to overcome their life challenges. We are not providing medical or therapeutic advice. Should you require that type of assistance, we recommend you contact a medical professional immediately. If you have any questions or concerns about today's episode or any Voice of Men 360 content, please email us at info@voiceofmen360.org. And on with the show. So welcome to the program, Bruce. We certainly appreciate you joining us today. Let's start with your background. Can you share your background with us and your experience in criminal law?
All right. Good evening. Thanks for having me. Happy to talk about myself and about this topic. If I ramble on too long, feel free to mute my mic or shut me down or turn the camera off, because I have a habit of sometimes rambling on, but that's probably good as a host and as a guest for your audience. So the question was, I want a little bit about my background, my experience in criminal law. Okay. I've been a criminal defense lawyer for 34 years. I was called right around this time, maybe about a month or so, mid to late March, in 1991. So I've been doing this for 34 years, and I'm not one who did civil litigation or family law or prosecutorial work. I've been a defense lawyer from day one.
Wow.
And I've been defending individuals and corporations, and sometimes a number of people at the same time co-accused, for people, men, women, children, who are being accused of any sort of wrongdoing, both from a regulatory perspective and a criminal perspective. So that's what I do, and that's what I've been doing. Started out with just me. I rented space. Actually, I started out of my home, working out of my home for a while. That didn't last too long. Then I rented space. And curious thing about my beginning, I rented space, rented an apartment, and had a baby all within 30 days. So you talk about the three great stressors: starting a career, starting a family, and moving, all within the 30-day period. And I remember thinking, if I can get through that, I can get through anything. And I've pretty well seen and done a lot. And I'm one of the few people who I'm lucky enough to say that I really love what I do. I enjoy it. I love it. I find it interesting. And even after 30 odd years, it's maybe a little bit different motivations and a different love of it. But I still enjoy the new client walking through the door and figuring out a way how I'm going to handle a problem and represent and help this person get through what usually is their toughest times. So, as I said, I started off 34 years ago. It was just myself. Then I had one secretary. I had one assistant who worked part-time, and then I hired a young woman who in 1992 who is still with me. Barbara Campagna has still with me. 33 years later for her, 34 years for me. So she's been with me from pretty well day one. And we now have grown. We've moved premises. We've actually expanded our offices and renovated about a year and a half ago. And we would have 4 lawyers working in our office. We've got a couple of paralegals, a couple of students, a couple of legal assistants. So on any given day, Engel and Associates is a busy office with anywhere from 8 to 10 people running around doing what they got to do. And times have changed with COVID, right? The old days, everybody would be out of the office running around court. Now they're running around the office, which that's sometimes good and that's sometimes not so good. And I could talk a little bit about that as well, but it's a hustling, bustling type of place to work. My office is downtown Ottawa, and we're busy. We've got a lot of stuff on the go, never a dull moment, and not a lot of room or time for downtime. This is my downtime: watching television, doing podcasts, reading. And my wife was even saying to me, "You practice criminal law all day. Why do you watch all these true crime shows?" And it's just a passion and interest of mine. So that's what I'm about. At least a good chunk of what I'm about. There's a lot more to me, but that's the professional Bruce Engel.
Wow, that's quite a resume. And we do have one thing in common, at least. I love true crime dramas as well. So I spend quite a bit of time looking at those on TV. So you've obviously grown in leaps and bounds, starting from yourself, as you mentioned, in your home. And you've prospered to the stage. When I say prosper, I mean in terms of reaching out to people out there and assisting them as best you can. So that's a commendable job you and your associates have done in this field. So regarding what advice would you give to men and boys who are facing criminal charges, and how can they best navigate the justice system?
Well, the most important thing, and this doesn't necessarily apply strictly to men and boys, this applies to anybody. If you think you need a lawyer,
right,
you probably do. Right? There's people that call me and they go, "Do I need a lawyer? I got to go to court. Do I really need someone?" And I tell them, well, you don't have to have a lawyer. And it's the same thing. I tell the story. It's the same thing if you have a brain tumor, right? You don't really need a doctor. If you could freeze yourself and get a scalpel and cut your head open and remove that tumor, you can do it on your own. You don't need a doctor. You should get a doctor, but you don't need one. And there's with self-represented litigants nowadays, and with a very user-friendly, or at least supposed to be a user-friendly court environment, although I don't think it is. People can navigate certainly the criminal justice system. There's certainly other areas of law that people do it on their own, but they certainly can navigate the criminal justice system without a lawyer. They can have a paralegal. They can have a civilian assistant. They can go in self-represented, but not a good idea. And it's not a good idea. And I don't say that from a self-interest perspective. I say that also, I needed a lawyer. I didn't actually face any kind of formal criminal charges, but I've been accused of wrongdoing and breaching law society rules, and I retain a lawyer. And it's really nice to know, and it's comforting to know that you have somebody in your corner, right? Even if they don't do much, even if they just sit with you and don't say a word, there's a level of comfort that goes along with knowing that you're not alone against the state, against the big system, that you have someone that you could resort to if you need, and even if you don't use them, right? And I've had lots of clients say to me, you didn't really do much, you were just there, and you only spent a few hours returning my phone calls and reviewing documents. And they go, well, but if you needed me, I would have been there, right? So I always say, if you think you need a lawyer, get one, right? What's the worst case scenarios? You spend a little money, that you waste money, and that's a good situation. If you've wasted money for no reason and you didn't really need someone and the problem's resolved, that's a good problem to have, right? I always tell people, the time to look to save money is not when your future is on the line. It's not when the state is coming after you, whether it's criminal charges or anything else. The time to save money is, when you got to buy a car, maybe buy a cheaper car. If you got to go to a restaurant, have the smaller steak. Not when you're looking at criminal charges or even a criminal allegation. So that's the best answer I can give. If you think you need a lawyer, call one.
I like that. That can work as a slogan, actually, or motto. It is, as you mentioned, it is certainly reassuring to have that presence, that authority there, because I don't know for other people, but I would think that's a very taxing time, a very nervous time for an individual, facing any type of charges, and like having somebody there who you can lean on, ask questions, advice and whatnot. But just the mere presence is comfort enough in itself. So, yeah.
And people who face those tough questions and are stressed out because they get a call to come to the police station, they're not necessarily thinking straight, right? There's a lot of things going through their mind, whether they're guilty or not. And sometimes if you're not, all the more reason to be careful what you say and how you handle it. So yeah, it's a very important time, and the earlier the better, right? The earlier you engage a lawyer and you get that advice, the more likely you are not to cause problems that a lawyer will have to undo down the road, right? So in other words, not saying the wrong thing, not doing the wrong thing, not doing the wrong thing, right? Sometimes it's a good idea to call a police officer and say, I hear you and I understand, and I'm exercising my right not to say anything, and you do what you got to do. But a lot of people ignore the police, and I would always tell them, don't ignore them. Don't ignore them. You call them and you say, I'm exerting my right to remain silent, or I'll come in and I won't say anything, or I'm not going to come in unless you really need me and explain me a little more. There are a number of options, and it's not that clear what your rights are when dealing with the police. A lot of it will depend on the allegations and the information that they have, which they will not necessarily honestly and fulsomely share with you. So it's important early on to turn the tides, if I can say that, make the system work for you, as opposed to being very vulnerable when you're on your own in the dark against the state that has unlimited resources, or certainly more resources than you probably have.
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely need some assistance. You definitely need somebody in your corner to handle the big bad state. So, it's a good idea to get a lawyer up, as the saying goes. Now we come to this. It's a sort of a delicate area of false accusations. Do you see any ways that men can protect themselves against false allegations or false accusations, both professionally and in their personal lives?
Well, I've been falsely accused. And there's nothing more frustrating and scary and distressing than being falsely accused of something. And I was falsely accused of something quite serious. It didn't amount to criminal charges, but it came to the point where, excuse me, I had to retain a lawyer, and I had to wait over the weekend to have my name cleared, right? It was basically the Crown Attorney a police officer called me saying they're investigating me because I may have advised my client to breach his bail conditions. And the end result was that I was not on the phone with my client. My client actually called me. I didn't call him, and I didn't realize that somebody else was on the phone. And it was a 3-second call that I could not have known about. But I got the call on a Friday, and I was cleared on the Monday. But I had to sweat through the weekend, and then not knowing what was happening. And I went in over the weekend to my office to look at my records and find out, and I realized what exactly happened. And I was very upset with the police officer because, in my view, the police officer did not do a proper investigation. Had he done a proper investigation, he wouldn't have needed to call me and to scare the crap out of me for no reason. So I know what it's like to be falsely accused, and I know what it's like to need a lawyer. And I spoke to a lawyer, and I retained a lawyer who I spoke to, met with him on the Friday afternoon, and dealt with him through the weekend. And the Monday, I think I was cleared by Monday afternoon. So whatever I did pay the lawyer, whatever I paid him was well worth it, even though it really didn't do anything. And at the end of the day, I didn't really need him. He didn't do anything to solve the problem. The problem solved itself. But the fact that I had someone in my corner, the fact that I had the comfort of a more senior lawyer who basically told me, he asked me what happened. I told him, he goes, "You didn't do anything wrong. We're going to fix this." So I've been there. I've done it. I've seen it. I felt it. So, the question is, what can they do to protect themselves? Document things as much as you can. And, this is a big problem. This is a big problem in the law. When people ask me, would there be anything in the law you'd want to change? I tell them there's two things. One within my area of expertise, one that's not. Number one is the law of damages. Pain and suffering is capped at like $300,000, a little more than that, for pain and suffering in Canada. And in the States, you can get millions. So the insurance, the insurance industry has got some very good people who have been able to advocate to lower potential damages. They've got some very good lobbyists, I guess they call them, who have lobbied to make the law very favorable to big insurance, and to the detriment of individuals who suffered. And I've had family member who suffered and deserved much more than $300,000 for pain and suffering. So that's number one. And number two is the law of sexual assault. So you ask how someone could protect themselves, short of documenting and filming every correspondence and communication you have, right? And you can't film the actual sexual episode. Short of doing that, it's very difficult to protect oneself. It's one of the big problems in our times, right? The Me Too movement came on, and the courts and people in general are afraid to call a complainant a liar when they are liars, right? I've had a complainant get caught in a lie in a sexual assault case, and my client was this is going back maybe 15 years ago. He was a very well-spoken, articulate, a diplomat of sort. And the allegations went from a lot of this happening in Ottawa to overseas in Tunisia. And during the cross-exam, I said, what are you talking about Tunisia? This is the first time we hear about this. She goes, yeah, I just remembered it. The bottom line is the judge then found my client not guilty after he had to go through trial. And instead of calling the complainant a liar, he said, well, the complainant seems to have some problems. And he sugarcoated it and was afraid to call her out for what she was, right? But the police are not afraid to call an accused out and accuse someone on sometimes flimsy evidence or only the words without any corroboration of a complainant, which are allowed to do. So that's a very big problem that men and boys and we have nowadays, right? The courts bend over backwards to do what they can to accommodate complainants, female complainants, and complainants in general. And one area, I was just reading a recent Supreme Court of Canada case, when an accused text messages a complainant, that goes in. When a complainant text messages an accused, that doesn't go in. The privacy interests keep that evidence out. What could be more unfair than that? Do I have to even say more than that? Forget about some other stuff, anecdotal stories and the general Me Too movement that's overtaken. And, look, there is rampant sexual assault that goes out there. There is no doubt about it. But you can't, and complainants, females who use the system to derive some sort of advantage in a custody dispute, for revenge against a husband who perhaps has been unfaithful,
right.
That's awful, and it goes on, and there's very little repercussion, right? Very few. What are the numbers on perjury charges? Do complainants who are proven to be lying in court or lying to the police, do they get charged with perjury? Does that ever happen? And I'm going to tell you a story that really brings this home. I had a case where my client was called into the police station, and the police interviewed my client and interviewed the complainant. And at the end of it, the officer calls me and says, "We're not charging your client. We don't have grounds. We believe the complainant's lying." I said, "Okay, great." 3 months later, the officer calls me and he goes, "Bruce, the complainant has filed a complaint against him." And he asked me to kind of back his play, right? And I said, "Listen, you made the right decision." And I was actually supporting him. So what is an officer going to do? You know how many times I've heard officers say, "I'm not going to make the tough choice. Let the judge make that tough choice. Let the Crown Attorney make that decision." Officer, the easy decision is charge him and let's see where the cards fall. So I'd say you've identified a very big problem that I wish I had the answer to. I don't think I have the answer. Right. It's a problem, and men and boys and people have got to be very careful, right? It's a good thing that there's cameras everywhere, but there's not cameras everywhere, right? Inside and private discussions, there's not cameras everywhere. So what do? Do you put the camera on and say, "Hey, that was a nice time. That was a nice date we had. Are you agreeing to have sex?" And even if you do that, you can't consent to sex in advance. It's got to be, it's got to be timely. It's got to be exactly the same time of the act, right? You can't pre-consent to sex in advance. That could be revoked. The complainant's mind can change. So even that, you can't document that, right? Very, very tough area. It's something that's near and dear to me. I'm very concerned about it, but it's a big problem, and I may not have all the answers.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. I heard about a particular scenario. I don't know if this is gossip or fact, but I heard that if both parties consent to sex, but both were intoxicated at the time, the female can still file a complaint against the man for assault after the event. Is that true?
Well, here's a law of consent with intoxication. You could consent to have sex when you're intoxicated. You can. But in order for the level of intoxication to vitiate any consent or cancel out any consent, you got to be really, really drunk. You got to be so drunk or so intoxicated to the point that you could not have with a free mind have consented. So it's a really tricky area. So the question is, can you do that in advance? And then it's very contextual, right? The consent has got to be coincidental with the act, right? You can't consent in advance. It's got to be at the same time it's going on, and a complainant could revoke it at any time, right? Which is also, there's another conversation starter. Right in the middle of the act, she says no, and guy's got to stop. That's a whole nother ball game, right? And so, what you're saying is two people agree, they're drunk, and then after the fact, she says, well, you know what, I really didn't consent. I was really drunk. I didn't have the wherewithal. I didn't have the operating mind. I didn't have the ability to consent at the time. So no, I didn't. And I may have only consented to part of the act, not the full sex act. So it's a tough area. Everything's very contextual and fact specific, right? The law of sexual assault is very general. All these cases are fact specific. You don't have a general set of laws that apply widespread. Very contextual, very fact specific.
Yeah. This is very concerning for men and boys especially. And as you mentioned, obviously the people, there are people out there who do commit these acts, and there are laws in place that should be dealt with them in that regard. But for those who are falsely accused and things like that, or didn't take the proper precaution of arming themselves with, I don't know how you would do that, to prepare yourself that consent was given. That's a very tricky area, as you said.
It's very difficult. And here's what I tell my clients. And I just finished up a case in which my client was accused of sexual assault on his girlfriend, and they stayed together. They're staying together. The Crown ended up withdrawing charges, and a peace bond it resolved it. So no criminal charges. All sex allegations were withdrawn. There's just a peace bond, which is basically extended bail conditions for him to behave himself. But here's what I tell him. I say, listen here. Your girlfriend has accused you of sexual assault. So if you did this, and if you sexually assaulted her, and if you even assaulted her, did less than sexual assault, right, it's a problem. There's a problem with the relationship. You got a problem, and you got a problem being together. If she's toxic, and if she instigated and instigated you to do that and contributed towards your criminal conduct, which you got to be responsible for, that's a problem. And you got to rethink whether you want to be with her and whether you should be with her. And if you didn't do that, and if she's lying, and even if even if you're forgiving her and she's apologizing, you got to rethink, is this someone you want to be with? So exactly. That's what I tell my clients, right? You got a problem here. You got a relationship that's not healthy. It's toxic, and it's not good for you, not good for her. So you should move on. And it's not, don't protect yourself. Don't take out all safety measures when dealing with this person. If you did it, you got to get some help. And if you didn't do it, you got to get away from her.
Very tricky indeed. As you say, it's all contextual. So, there's no hard and fast applications that one can adhere to. So I don't know. You can tell someone to be as careful as possible. That doesn't really mean anything, sometimes.
It really doesn't in this world, right? And in this system. And you could only be so careful, right? There's a lot of variables that the most careful person can't even control. Forget about controlling, can't even really affect, right? You can put cameras everywhere, microphones everywhere, have someone sign consent forms. There's only so far you can go, right? So I remember when I started practice, and if I would interview a woman, I was told, make sure you're not alone with them.
Yeah.
And I thought, what do you mean I can't be alone with someone in this day and age and interview them, and I have to have another person? I go, if they're going to complain and make up a story, they'll say I was alone with them. Maybe on that occasion I was alone, or if they're making it up. Yeah, Bruce Engel, when he meets with females, usually has someone with them. But on this occasion, yeah, he didn't, if it's a lie, right? So you can't protect yourself from that. The bottom line is, I ignored that. I meet with women alone, and I think I can count on one hand how many times I had someone else come in. And it's not even so much because the woman was a danger. It's just a client. I've met with other people because male clients were problematic, and I wanted to be careful and not be alone with them for a number of reasons. So, at what point, if there's going to be a chill in the air and you're going to be worried about that sort of thing, then it's time to go on and sell real estate or do something else. If you want to do this area, you gotta be able to work freely, think freely, speak freely, and you can't be too cautious. You got to be cautious, you got to be reasonable, but you can't safeguard against everything.
Yeah, I think that comes down to there was something called the anecdotal Mike Pence rule, the former VP in the US. He had something where he said he would not go out to dinner with any work companion, or anybody else other than his wife. Right. And if he has to be in a room with a female, there has to be a third person in there. So, I mean, it sounds kind of, scary, to say the least. But I don't know how careful you can be.
Good luck with that. You see how far he got.
Exactly. Now let's move on to a different topic. How can we work towards creating a more inclusive and supportive environment for all individuals, regardless of gender or background, when it comes to the justice system?
Well, it's, sometimes you just can't, right? Sometimes the parties are so adverse and so far gone and, so offended by the other side that sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can't fix that.
Right.
Oftentimes, however, we have the collaborative justice program, which, where there's a neighbor dispute. And I'm going through one right now where my client was best friends with his neighbor and they got into it. And I say, how do you feel? He goes, I feel sick. I miss my buddy. And sometimes, right, when the emotions settle down, you don't get into that right away. You don't set up a collaborative justice meeting within a week or even a month of the allegations. You let the emotions settle down a bit. And sometimes when each side gets to appreciate what the other side is going through, right? When a complainant realizes that an accused is being jerked around, had to get a lawyer, and it's costing him time and money and stress. Sometimes they seem to appreciate the other side, and vice versa. An accused person may not realize the impact that he had on a complainant. Maybe he said something stupid that he didn't realize would be taken so offensively. So it's commiserating and being empathetic with the other side. But the criminal justice system is adversarial, and it's created to resolve these disputes that sometimes are not resolvable, right? Sometimes you have to have a third party, a judge, make a tough decision. But to answer your question, I think the most important thing is and that's where a guy like me comes in, the lawyer has got to convey that to an accused person, right? I always tell my clients, I'll say, listen, as much as you don't want to go to court, believe me, the complainants don't want to go to court. They're not chomping off the bit. Some of them do, but very rare. That's exceptional circumstance. And you gotta explain that's not so easy for the other side. True, they may not have had to get a lawyer, but They got to spend time. They got to go to court. They got to speak to a crown attorney. Sometimes they're frustrated that their interests are not getting, they're not getting heard or respected. So it's up to the lawyer to try and, as opposed to drive a wedge between it, to try to maybe bring it together and in certain circumstances. But look, there's certain cases that are going to resolve, and there's certain cases that will never resolve. And that's where a guy like me, doing it 30 years, I recognize that. So there's no point wasting time and to where you say, how can we work to try to create a more inclusive and supportive environment? Sometimes there's two parties that's never going to be amenable for. So it would be great, but sometimes it doesn't happen. But the criminal justice system, and more so, the diversion programs and collaborative justice, that sometimes try to embrace and make the parties feel better about the resolution as opposed to going to court and fighting it. I represented a white supremacist who posted anti-gay, anti-Semitic, Nazi type of logos and slogans on a student's door in university, charged with hate crimes. And he was a young kid who had his whole life ahead of himself. And the crown attorney saw fit not to drag him through a trial and throw the book at him, but he ended up meeting with an imam, with a priest, with a rabbi, and saw the impact it had on the complainant, right? And it woke him up, and we resolved it without going through the court system. Ultimately, it was resolved in court, but the bulk of the work was done out of court. But again, that really depends on open-minded prosecutors and the right type of accused, right? There's some accused who you're just never going to change, right? They're going to be prejudicial, they're going to be bigoted, they're going to be anti-Semitic, they're going to be anti-gay, whatever. But there's some people who make mistakes and could see the errors of the way and can be a little open-minded and perhaps be open to alternative perspectives.
Okay, now on that topic, what about the indigenous community? Have you had any interactions with them, and how was that experience?
Well, the indigenous, they get special treatment to a large extent, right? There's Indigenous People Court, IPC, Indigenous Peoples Court. They have their own court in which they get smudged, and there's a whole, I don't really do a lot of that, but there's a separate court system. And then there's Gladue reports, which are basically pre-sentence reports, but from an indigenous perspective. So their cultural idiosyncrasies, their specific cultural predilections, the fact that they are indigenous, whether they're very, very intensely indigenous and live on a reserve, or they're just card-carrying members, they have the right to have a very specific type of report prepared with those concerns, with those issues that are explored. So they have the indigenous people get their own special court, which the lawyers and judges are trained to look at that. And they get Gladue reports, which are prepared with those interests in mind and looked at and considered. So, we've come a long way, right?
Yeah.
50 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, I don't think we had that. I mean, Gladue maybe about 10 years, but certainly years ago, and certainly in Ottawa, we didn't have an IPC court and the extensive Gladue reports that are being prepared today.
Okay, well, that's important information, and for those out there, it's good to know that these resources are available for the indigenous people. We're running out of time. We have about 2 or 3 questions left. Do you see your work evolving in the future, and if so, how?
Well, I'm getting near the end of my career. I'm doing this 30 odd years now. Is it evolving? I would like I said, there's 2 areas I'd like a lot of change. I go on podcasts like this. I have my own podcast in which I I talk about absurdities in the law, and my podcast is called Presumption of Nonsense, and we're available on Spotify. I'll type it in, and we got about 9 episodes. And we talk about absurdities in the law and kind of more of lighthearted,
Right.
Lightheartedness. But I'm not a politician. I'm not a judge. I'm given a set of tools and I argue, and I just do the best I can for my clients. I use the tools I'm given. I try to be as creative as I can. I tell my staff, I tell guys, girls, you make sure that you do whatever it takes to try and change the law of sexual assault, because it's turned full circle, right? And yes. It's worth a fight, but is it in me? Am I going to see it in my lifetime? I hope so. Probably not. I think we're going to have to settle for this sort of environment for the next few years, but the tides may or may not turn. With guys like Donald Trump, you think things may change because he's very, very right wing, but when he gets out of there, we may see the pendulum swing the other way even more so, right? And a lot of people think he's an idiot and don't respect him. So I'm not sure if he's the right catalyst for that change, right? You got to have a voice of reason when there's change. You have to have someone who's logical and reasonable and, with their feet on the ground. So, like I said, I'm not a politician. I'm just a lowly lawyer who uses the tools to represent my client. And you fight as hard as you can. You try to expand the law, the interpretation as you can, but there's only so much you can do. And that's you say, will my work evolve in the future? And if so, how? I'm going to continue to do what I do. I get up every morning and I go and I help my clients. I have trials coming up. I'm helping them do what I can. Am I looking at the big picture? I'd love to. And I talk about it a little bit, but no, I don't think I'm going to be able to make those changes. I don't have the authority. I don't have the jurisdiction, and I don't think enough people will listen to me. That doesn't mean I'm wrong, right?
Yeah, no. As you said, you've come a long way. You've done a lot for your 30-odd years that you've been in service, and I'm sure people have benefited quite a bit with you. What final thoughts or recommendations would you like to share with the audience?
I'm just going to write this in. Final thoughts. Well, it's a podcast and the organization's about men who I probably grew up in a man's world, right? In a men's, it was a man's world for sure. But women have come a long way, right? Women now outnumber men in law school, but men still, they're more male judges, more male CEOs, more male senior partners. So, it's still a man's world to a large extent, but, why do we differentiate even between men and women, right? Why do we differentiate religion? Religion further separates us as we're divided and separated already. Why do we differentiate between colors and, black people, white people, brown people? I'm going to tell you, my office, we got Jewish lawyers. We have a black legal assistant. I got an Italian legal assistant. I got 2 Spanish. I had a Greek lawyer before. I had a Lebanese lawyer before. We were as worldly as it got. And like let's not talk about the differences, right? Aren't we all part of the human race? So, if you're going to hire someone, who cares if it's the first black president or the first black or the first female president? Get the right person for the right job. We're all people. We're all part of the human race. And does it really matter?
Yeah.
If it's a man who's been accused, or if it's a female who's who's been wronged, right? We're like, let's get away from that, right? Let's get away from that. I'm going to tell you, right? I'm a white Jewish guy. Dipchand, you're brown. I don't know what religion you are. I just see you as another guy who, you're just another guy that I'm talking to that has the same interest, and we're all humans. I don't judge you. I don't think, when I'm looking and talking to you, I don't think anything other than you're a pretty smart guy who knows a lot and is asking the right questions and doing a pretty good job, right? Right? I mean, there's good and bad in everything, and let's get rid of this separation. And I know it's a men's organization because men have become a minority, right? Men are don't get the special interest that a lot of women do with the Me Too movement. So yeah, you're right, but let's just get away. We're all part of the human race.
I agree with you 100%. That's why we do it, because of the position that men and boys find themselves in. But as I mentioned in the beginning, we also lend a hand to other demographics as well. Coming back to the point we were just discussing, I agree. I'm a merit-based person myself, and I wish we could get rid of the first black this or the first woman that or whatever. If somebody earns a job, they're justified in getting that position through merit. That's all that matters. You just say the person's name. This is the person who is now in charge of X, Y, or Z, and that should be good enough for anybody. Why we have to go off on this tangent? I remember when this the press secretary for the previous U.S. admin, the first thing when she got up there, she said, "I'm a black lesbian," or something like that. I'm not sure what that had to do with the job. I'm just using that as an example to show why is this necessary. But we could ramble on and on about this particular issue forever, and I don't know what's going to change about that. We are pretty much at the end of the show. I have one final question, but before I do, I just want to pass on a bit of more information about our group. We are here asking, and really we would like to see more and more people engaging with our organization. Reach out to us. You could be, we don't, it doesn't matter who you are, where you are, whatever the situation is. We would like more and more people to engage with us through all the different forums that we are available on. I would start off with our phone number, which is 226-289-8784. Our email address is info@voiceofmen360.org. And our website is www.voiceofmen360.org. We're also on Facebook. We have a group page there. We would appreciate if you can join our group and see our daily activities. And of course, invite your friends as well. Other social media platforms you can find us on would be Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. We do have a YouTube channel, Voice of Men 360, and we would dearly love for you to subscribe to that as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all very much for taking this time to join us today. I do have one final question for Bruce. How can our listeners learn more about your work, including your contact information?
Well, you can reach me on my website, www.bruceengel.com. You Google my name, you'll find my website. You get a hold of my email, my phone numbers. That's my email, and there's my website. And check out my podcast. We're 9 episodes in. I'm really proud of it. I think it's really good. We're a lot more lighthearted than this one. This is a more of a serious, well planned and well laid out, well thought out podcast with a real aim and a real goal. My podcast is punk rock. We just get them there and start talking. Not too much. We don't overproduce it. Not too much preparation. It's me and some lawyers from my office and some outside. We got an outside lawyer, and we talk about the absurdities and stuff that's problematic with the system. And we're not necessarily doing anything to make it better, but we're just talking about it. And any kind of change is going to start with a discussion, right?
Yeah, well, people out there, I would encourage you to check out Bruce's podcast with his fellow lawyers. I think that's something I would enjoy myself. That's something I should check out because I like the light-hearted angle. It adds, a sort of spice to it and make it more interesting. I would think. So that's again something I would encourage others
Check it out. I'm a better podcaster than a lawyer, believe it or not.
Well,
I almost went into broadcast. I almost went into broadcasting, and my English literature teacher told me my marks are too good. I should go be a lawyer. So, but I almost went into broadcasting.
I'm sure you would have excelled there as well. So we want to thank you so much, Bruce Engel, for joining us today. We certainly appreciate your time and your expertise, and I hope the audience have benefited quite a bit from that. So thanks again, Bruce, and we wish you all the best in your future endeavors. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you again for joining us today. We certainly appreciate your time, and a special thanks to the man behind the controls, our president, Sivam. He is working away diligently there, making sure everything's in order. Thanks, Sivam. Thank you all for joining us today. And from all of us here at Voice of Men 360, good night.